There we go. All right, so welcome everybody to the Montgomery Better Buses campaign launch event. We are excited to have this lunchtime discussion with you all about ride-on and Metrobus in Montgomery County and how it can be made better. My name is Jane Lyons. I'm the Maryland Advocacy Manager for the Coalition for Smarter Growth. Our mission is to promote walkable, inclusive, transit-oriented communities throughout the DC region. We see that as the most sustainable and equitable way to provide opportunities for everybody and to grow sustainably. And this is part of a larger regional push that we are doing to improve bus service throughout the region. And me being the Montgomery County staffer, this is my part of that push. And we are making this push along with over 25 other organizations. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. Start with a little bit overview of what we're going to spend the next hour doing. I'm going to start by providing some details, some background about Ride On and about the campaign that is being launched today. Then we're going to have some remarks from Council Member Evan Glass. And then we will have a panel discussion and Q&A where you will have the opportunity to ask our wonderful, amazing panel questions about things related to transit, to Ride On, and how that relates to so many other things that are really, really important. So a little bit of background on Ride On. So Ride On, depending on how you measure it, is the largest suburban bus system in the United States by ridership. And also depending on how you define suburban, but it is one of the biggest bus systems in the United States. These are all pre-COVID numbers. The average daily ridership before COVID was about 85,000. There are 80 routes of Ride On, although some of those have been cut or lowered due to COVID. Most of the funding for Ride On comes from property taxes and from state aid. And you can see how ridership has been declining, but that's also part of a larger trend throughout the United States of declining transit ridership that was actually starting to just tick back up right before the pandemic. But Ride On is a really important part of Montgomery County, although it has not been comprehensively redesigned in over 20 years. And of course, as we know, a lot has changed about Montgomery County over the past 20 years, including where people live, where they work, where the major job centers and destinations are. And so while Ride On is a really important part of the county, getting people from where they are to where they need to go, we think that that can be done a lot better. So who rides Ride On? A recent report that Councilmember Glass commissioned from the Office of Legislative Oversight of Montgomery County, which I'm sure he will talk a little bit more about later, showed that almost half of Ride On riders have an income of $30,000 or below. And so people who ride On are disproportionately very low income, and nearly 80% of riders are people of color. So when we're talking about transit, there's an implication that we're also talking about equity because of the people who use that service. And this chart here shows data of the DC region at large, which is in line with who rides Ride On and Metrobus in Montgomery County as well. And so you can see from this that the people who use Ride On and ride buses in general are disproportionately lower income, are more likely to have no car in their household. They're more likely to have limited English proficiency and much more likely to be a person of color who is not white and not Hispanic, or is Hispanic, sorry. So that tells us a little bit about who is riding the bus system and who serves to benefit when we talk about improving. Although everybody serves to benefit, there are certainly people who stand to benefit the most from getting where they need to go faster and more reliable and potentially cheaper. So a little bit of background on Montgomery County. I believe it was in 2013, Montgomery passed its bus rapid transit network plan. We did have the first route of the Montgomery County BRT network open, I believe just a few months ago. The Ride On, or the Flash service that goes up and down Route 29 or Colesville Road. And so that has actually opened. That is the good news, and it is being used. The buses are beautiful, and it is very fast. We're disappointed that it doesn't have dedicated lanes for the full route. So it's not really true bus rapid transit in that sense, but it is a major improvement over the bus system or the bus service that existed there before. And so if you haven't ridden that yet, go out and do that. But there's a much bigger vision at play here that the county would like to see for bus rapid transit very soon, although it is costly to build this type of system and even more difficult to do in a recession. Last year, when the county council passed the capital budget, the capital improvement plan, which looks at the capital budget over the next 6 years, there wasn't any funding for construction for these BRT lines that are really important. There is funding to continue design and studying these routes and to figure out how to best do them. So they are still moving along, but there is no construction funding plan for the next 6 years. So this is not currently coming anytime soon. So that prompted myself and other advocates who had been speaking with WMATA and as a part of the bus transformation project. We're also part of the Metro Now Coalition, which is CSG is a coalition of business and nonprofit groups who would push for dedicated metro funding, who are now very interested in bus. So there seems to be this question forming throughout the region of how can we make better use of what we already have with the existing bus service. If we're not going to be able to build the bus rapid transit network anytime soon, it's something we should still continue to work towards, then what should we do? Because people have these really dire transit needs. So a little bit about Ride On during COVID. It's currently fare free. You are expected to board through the back door instead of the front door in order to protect the bus operator. You come into less contact with them that way. Ridership is down about 75% pre-COVID levels, although that has fluctuated over the course of the past 9 months now that we've been in this pandemic. Ridership on rail has been down about 90 to 95%. So that shows you that the people who use Ride On and Metrobus are the essential workers. They are the people who maybe they have other choices, but their other choices aren't very good either. Ride On is requiring face coverings and giving out face masks to people who don't have them. And there is increased service on the routes that are being highly used right now and lowered service on others, and no service after midnight. So the question that other advocates and I came together to ask is, how do we make this system better? We want to build back better. We don't want to reopen the county in a way that just has more traffic, more congestion, more pollution, and having it be more difficult for people to get where they need to go. So here's the coalition of groups, although I realize I think that there are a few groups who have not who I did not update this on there. We have over 25 organizations. Groups are continuing to join our coalition because people from across all sectors recognize this as something that impacts them. So we have organizations like Shepherd's Table, Manna Food Center. That's one that I should have added on here that isn't yet, but is on the platform that will go around out afterwards. The Affordable Housing Conference of Montgomery County has joined our coalition, Habitat for Humanity. These are organizations and groups that do not work directly on transit per se, or even environmental issues. But they recognize that in order to serve the needs of the population that they work with, that it is really important that people can get to where they need to go using the county's bus systems. And so other members, you can look at this for yourself. We include our coalition includes the union that represents Ride On workers, Coalition for Smarter Growth, of course, a lot of wonderful organizations who first came together, I can't believe almost a year ago for Transit Equity Day. And there I am with Shruti, who you'll hear from later, and Councilmember Glass. We were able to get a declaration stating that February 4th, 2019 or 2020 was Transit Equity Day in honor of Rosa Parks' birthday. And we held an event at CASA, and you'll hear Shanti Martinez from CASA today speak. All those people together in a room, that was really the birth of our coalition. and talking about how this is an issue that really brings together so many different interests. So our goal is to get Montgomery County to conduct a comprehensive redesign and reimagining of ride-on and Metro bus systems. We want to see an improvement and investment plan for the next 15 years. Because this is not something we're going to be able to do tomorrow. But we believe that buses are the backbone of a sustainable, equitable transportation system and a thriving local economy, which is going to be more important now than ever. So we seek to make buses the mode of choice, fare-free, and carbon neutral. In the short term, we want to maintain bus service. We don't want to see bus service cut. And we'll talk more later about why it's important to lean into that now and not give into to budget cuts there, and to fund a redesign and reimagining study led by MCDOT, the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, in partnership with WMATA, because Metrobus is also a huge part of Montgomery County's transit system. There's currently funding for 2022 for something to start. That is a restructuring study, but we want that funding to be moved earlier. We want the scope to be expanded. We want deeper community outreach, and we want it to include a reimagining of the system, not just a redesign of the routes. So, and then in the medium and long term, we want increased investment in our bus systems. We recognize that given the tough fiscal situation that we're in right now, that might not be possible this year. We need to maintain, but it might be difficult to increase. But over the long term, to get to those three goals, we're going to need to have some significant investments. We also need regional collaboration to get to those goals. So these are our values. I won't read through them all because we have a lot of values and things that we think are important. Some of them include reliability, frequency, equity. We want to connect people to where they need to go. We want to reduce travel time so that people are sitting on the bus for a shorter period of time. Right now in Montgomery County, you can reach over 1 million jobs in 45 minutes if you have your own car, but you can only reach several thousand if you are only traveling via transit. And that is not a marker of a strong economy. It's not a marker of transit equity. And it's not a marker of the progressive values that Montgomery County has. So we also value having a ride-on and Metro bus systems that remain public as much as possible, that are operated and maintained publicly, and have public management. So this is our platform. We've broken it down into 3 parts. Number 1, service improvements. So this includes the redesign, interim express bus service on those future BRT corridors so that we can start really making those high capacity transit corridors. We have other improvements, like we want to see ride-on and Metro bus stay fare free as they are right now during the pandemic. We want the fleet to be electrified. We want bus stops to be upgraded. There are some really dismal bus stops in Montgomery County that I've tried to navigate and not known how to. And 3, implementation. We want a funding strategy. Part of the reason there is no construction funding for the bus rapid transit network is because we didn't create a funding source, and we didn't consciously set out how we were going to fund those massive projects. We also want to increase transparency within MCDOT, improve community and rider engagement and outreach, keep ride-on unionized, and create minimum service standards. So a big part of our platform is this idea that free fares alone are not enough. It's not enough to just give people free transit service. Together with service improvements, you would see the most result in ridership, climate, congestion, equity, and economic development gains. And this right here, this might be a little technical, but shows the relationship between low times in between buses, that's what headways are, and the ridership. So as headways get longer, as you have to wait longer and longer for a bus, ridership goes down. So we know from ride-on, we know from every other bus system in the United States and across the world that when service improves, when you only have to wait 5 or 10 minutes for a bus and you can count on getting to where you're going on time, that people are likely to ride the bus. So that is why we really want to center service improvements along with free fares and other things. So now I'm going to transition to the next part and talk about why should we support transit? Why now? Why buses and not other modes of transit? These are all going to be addressed and more by our wonderful speakers. And I want to start out by turning it over to Montgomery County Council member Evan Glass. So I will give him a introduction. Evan Glass was elected to Montgomery County in 2018 as an at-large member. He serves on the Transportation and Environment Committee and the Health and Human Services Committee. He was the lead person who spearheaded the Kids Ride Free legislation that allows all MCPS students to use Ride On free of charge. And he's also been a leader on the county's Vision Zero efforts, becoming very vocal on pedestrian safety issues. He also serves on the Montgomery County Council's as the representative of the Montgomery County Council on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board. That's quite a mouthful, but it's a very important body. And finally, Councilmember Glass is the first LGBTQ member of the Montgomery County Council. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to him. Thank you so much for being here today, Councilmember Glass.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. That's why we shorthanded to TPB, Transportation Planning Board. It is a mouthful for all of us. But thank you, Jane and CSG, Sierra Club, CASA, McGeo, our workforce, and everybody else who's participating in this Zoom and this conversation. And more importantly, thank you all for your advocacy and for building this campaign together. Your efforts are needed now more than ever as we begin to recover from the pandemic. And we know there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we know that transit also faces challenges, as Jane commented on, because of the pandemic and because of the drop off in transit ridership across the country. Here in Montgomery County, Metrobus and Ride On are the backbone of our transportation network. And together, they, pre-pandemic statistic, they actually had 125,000 daily riders. 125,000 daily riders on our bus services here in Montgomery County, which is actually double the number of riders who on a daily basis would take the Red Line. 13 red line stations in Maryland, in Montgomery County. And so I think that's really important to put into perspective how important our buses and how utilized our buses are. And it's because of that importance that, as Jane also mentioned, back in 2019, I led the efforts here at the county to expand the Kids Ride Free program, which now allows every child under the age of 18 to ride the Ride On or Metrobus for free of charge anytime, any day of the week. And that program has proved so successful that in the first 6 months of it, which was last year, student ridership on Metrobus rose 51%, and ridership on Ride On rose 57%. And so, we know that when you allow access, expand access, people are going to ride. And so we need to continue those efforts here in Montgomery County. And they have been complicated, our efforts here on public transportation, just as they have been elsewhere, because of the pandemic. And some of the challenges are challenges that we've never seen before. While much of the bus service here has been restored from bare bones level back in the late spring and early summer, the Metro buses and Ride On, they still have less frequent and less reliable service compared to other networks. But those two networks, the Metro bus and the Ride On, they do continue to operate on longer headways and on shorter service spans. And I'll also say that back in the springtime, I had contacted our Department of Transportation and asked what we were doing to protect Ride On bus riders here in Montgomery County. And we started, because of that effort and my inquiry, we started providing face masks, face coverings on buses for people who were riding them. Because we know that there are more frontline personnel who rely and have to take our public transportation every day, and we want to make sure that they are safe while they're and they have access to good good health hygiene. So prior to the pandemic, Jane also mentioned that I had commissioned a report by the Council's Office of Legislative Oversight. Because last year, while I was working on the Kids Ride Free expansion, I knew that there was more to do. And recognizing that the county hadn't not taken a good holistic look at our bus service. The county has grown leaps and bounds over the last number of decades. It's grown 50% in population over the last 30 years, but we haven't really taken a holistic look at our bus routes. And so the first step in having that public conversation was for me to commission this report to see who actually takes the bus. Let's see who our ridership is, where they are, what the demographics are, so that we can have that second level conversation. And the information was pretty enlightening. The report showed that 78% of our ride-on riders are people of color. 42% of those riders speak a language other than English at home, and that 47%, nearly 50, nearly half of the riders have an annual income of less than $30,000. I think that paints a pretty good picture of who is taking ride-on, who is taking public transportation here in Montgomery County, and why transit is an equity issue. So fundamentally important to our conversations about social and racial justice here. And so while these stats are for ride-on, they are very similar to the Metro bus riders in Montgomery County as well. And last week, we in the DC region heard that WMATA was proposing severe budget cuts for later this year for the start of FY22 to be implemented next summer if we do not receive federal aid. And those cuts would be so severe, and as the demographics show, they would adversely affect low-income residents. And so included in those cuts, there were drastic reductions for Metro bus service with only skeletal system in place, with long headways on a few remaining lines. And as Jane so articulately stated, headways are so important because once you start reducing service, people don't want to take the system anymore. The only people who are really taking it are those who have to take it. And that comes back to transit equity, in my opinion. And so, I'll close by saying that we really do have to resist these cuts because they do adversely affect our essential workers who have no other options than taking these systems. And so the timing of this Better Bus campaign, I think, is fortuitous as we have a need for organizing to push back against these service cuts and to push for enhanced service and a rethinking of the way we deliver those services across the vast 500 square miles that is Montgomery County, that has had a huge amount of growth over the last 30 years. And so I continue looking forward to working with all of you as I have over the last 2 years so that we can enhance our bus system here in Montgomery County, not only during these challenging times, but for a more equitable future to come. So Jane, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass. Those were great words. You really summed it up perfectly as to why now is the time to talk about transit. And to push back against the cuts that were proposed by WMATA. Hopefully Congress will pass something very soon, but of course, if Metro bus service and Metro service is reduced, as we argued at your press conference the other day and pointed out that we will have to step up as a county to help fill in those gaps because this is such an essential service for workers and for getting people their groceries and prescriptions into where they need to go. So now I will share my screen again to introduce our panelists. And of course, Councilmember Glass is welcome to stay and weigh in on these questions as well. We are welcome to be joined today by three wonderful people who I'll introduce shortly. First is Shruti Bhatnagar. She is the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. Shruti has been a grassroots advocate in Montgomery for nearly 2 decades, and has made a positive impact through her work as board members of her neighborhood civic associations, community foundation county boards, commissions, PTA, founding member of volunteer organizations. She's done it all. And all of that work has been centered around equity and inclusion. And as chair of Sierra Club, she's working to make changes across Montgomery County to address climate change, racial equity, and social justice. Next is Ashanti Martinez, who is the research and policy analyst for CASA, representing the interest of their members in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. He has formerly served as a staffer to Prince George's County Council member Tom Jernoga, to a staffer to the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus, and is deputy political director to Delegate Pena Melnick. Ashanti was named the top 30 under 30 by WKYS in 2017, and also featured on the 40 under 40 by the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund. And finally, last but not least, we have Clint Sabrati, who is a ride-on bus operator and transit coordinator, as well as a newly elected executive member of UFCW Local 1994 McGeo, which is the union that represents ride-on workers, of which he is also a member of their climate committee. He's also a member of Sierra Club's executive committee, is a realtor, and a member of the Caribbean American Association Group. So thank you to Shruti, Ashanti, and Clint for joining us today. I'm really glad that you could be here. And I'll ask you guys a few questions from me, and then we will turn it over to the participants to ask some questions. So if you have questions for the panel, please chat those to me, Jane Lyons. You should be able to use the chat box to send me those questions. So my first question that I will kick over to all three of you is a pretty basic question. Let's set the frame for the conversation about, from your perspective, why should people care about buses, especially right now during a pandemic and an economic recession? So first, I will send that over to Shruti.
Thank you, Jane, and I want to thank you and the Coalition for Smarter Growth for organizing this forum. As the chair of Sierra Club Montgomery County Group, let me first start by saying that Sierra Club's top priorities are to address climate change and racial justice and equity. And to address climate change and racial equity, improving transit options is a key piece of the puzzle. I know Tina Slater, who's the lead for transportation for Montgomery County, and Brian Ditzler, who is the Sierra Club Maryland lead, are both on this forum today. I want to give a shout out to them because we have an amazing team in Sierra Club who is working together to address these issues. And the question that you've asked is a great question because transportation is the leading contributor to climate change, producing greenhouse gas emissions. A key way to address climate change is to improve our transportation sector, to reduce the need for people to use single occupancy vehicles, and instead rely on a robust public transportation for creating modern, clean transportation systems which are strong. Everyone should be caring about the buses and public transportation because it impacts jobs. It impacts transit workers, frontline workers who mainly rely on public transportation, and many commuters who are using public transportation to go to work and other places. Also climate and for health and safety reasons. There are youth who are not only using public transportation to go to different activities, but also to support their families by doing part-time jobs. And Councilmember Glass touched on this point about how Montgomery County bus riders are 80% people of color, and almost half have household income under $30,000. And in a large continuing study of upward monthly mobility based at Harvard, commuting time has emerged as the single strongest factor in the odds of escaping poverty. So I share all of this to say that the pandemic, it has created challenges because we are social distancing, we want to make sure we are safe, but it's also given us an opportunity to think about what can we do to invest in our robust public transportation system so that we are not encouraging people to use single vehicles, but also continue using public transportation, but also for the safety of our frontline workers and our community. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Shruti. I'll send it next to Ashanti. Why is it important to care about buses now from your perspective?
Thank you. I want to start by saying thank you to you, Jane, and the coalition for this opportunity to have a really much needed conversation about why we need better buses and more equitable transportation options here in Montgomery County. So good afternoon. I'm Ashanti Martinez from CASA. Our mission at CASA is to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of lives in working class and immigrant communities. And we've heard so much already about the frontline workers who for the last 9 months have been at the forefront of making sure that our economy is running. Many of those folks are my members. They're members of CASA who live in Montgomery County, who rely heavily on the bus post and pre-pandemic. They're going to rely heavily on making sure the bus and making sure that they can get to and from work, to and from church, to and from grocery shopping, their kids' schools. I mean, anything that they do, they are relying heavily on public transit. And so making sure that we have the infrastructure necessary so that they're not burdened by this is really essential. I mean, we have to make the investments because we've seen through this pandemic how crucial it is to keep these folks moving, because buses are how my folks move. And so I really look forward to continuing this conversation and more of the questions as they come today, because buses are essentially how essential workers move.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. And next I'll send it to Clint to ask from your perspective as a ride-on bus operator, why is it important for people to care about buses, especially right now?
Thank you, Jane, for allowing me to speak, and thank the Coalition of Smart Growth, the UFCW Local 9094, and many other organizations that actually has signed on to champion behind this event that we need, that is a very urgent matter right now that we should be addressing at all time. As a member of the union, you know, our main goal is always the union, as the employees. Being one of the largest employee union in the county, we carry a big stake in the whole transition of the better bus and making sure that everything is running correctly. With the question, why should we care? It's simple. Transit is essential to essential employees. The pandemic actually proved and shows it that majority of everyone that, like Councilmember Glass spoke earlier, 85% of the people who ride a bus are from low-income communities. There is other people who actually serve your, what is your grocery store, your Amazon, your garbage collectors, your nurses, and various among the fields in employment that ride the buses every day. So if the bus was not able to be moving back and forth to get them to where they needed to go, our economy will be more in a dire need than what it is right now, because those are the people right now that we count on the most to get all the work done through this pandemic, that carry a pre and post and right now in the present.
Thank you so much, Clint, for those words. I'm going to send it back to Shruti to ask you a question specifically about how this relates to the environment. So Montgomery County, as I'm sure you know, and a lot of the people who are attending this meeting know, has set a really ambitious goal to get to net zero by 2035, which is only 15 years from now. And I will point out our goal to get ride-on to be carbon neutral is part of a 15-year improvement plan. So hopefully that would get us to 2035. And how can buses help us to get there? Of course they can be carbon neutral, but is there more to buses than just that?
Thank you for that question, Jane. Well, as I mentioned earlier, transportation is the single largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So having more buses means that we can have fewer cars, which also means less greenhouse gas emissions. Think about having 80 to 100 people in a bus versus having single occupancy vehicles. So for us to reach the net zero goal by 2035, our county needs to take bold steps to address climate change, including investing in our public transportation system and our buses. So investing in a robust, efficient, and affordable public transportation means that we need to think about having buses that are reliable in their service, that can move efficiently and get people to quickly to places where they need to go, connecting them from their homes to places of work, other places in the community, so that people are relying more on public transportation instead of driving cars. And I think those are the steps that we need to be thinking about. How can we invest more in buses, more in public transportation, so that people are relying more on buses rather than on their cars?
Wonderful. Totally agree that that's where we need to move. Um, I want to next ask Clint a question specifically from your perspective as a bus operator. What are some of the biggest challenges that bus operators face? I'd especially be interested to hear about the challenges that you're facing right now during the pandemic, and how could this platform, the Better Buses platform, help you to address those challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, that's a great question you asked right there. We have a lot of challenges that face bus operators every single day. One of them right now is the consistent need to remind the public to wear masks on the bus. That's why, we every bus driver and me now as a transit coordinator, we walk with at least a handful of masks. That way, whenever we have a dispute about masks with the passenger, we hand them a mask to give them the option where they have something. And then the biggest thing pre the pandemic that bus operators face was fare dispute. More than 75% of the complaints or the confrontation between passengers and the bus operators always leads from the fare dispute about the fare. I believe strongly with the Better Bus campaign and we have a fare-free program, it eliminates all of that. Because right now that we're fare-free, that portion of the problem has disappeared. It declined completely. We're no longer having complaints about fare dispute. Everything is on the mask. So that showed that this one piece right here, it carries a big burden, especially when we're dealing with people of low-income communities that they have to choose between how much money they could pay in the fare in order to pay rent or groceries or everything else. So it's always a juggle between many different obstacles. So me personally, I believe fare dispute is our number one challenge that faces a bus operator every day. And as a transit coordinator, we tend to always have to go out to be the mediator, to always trying to find a equal ground to always make the situation better than what it could be, and not let it escalate beyond what it is. Because over the past years, a lot of operators have been assaulted in many forms just by asking them to pay the fare.
Thank you, Clint. And that, I think, was a really interesting thing to learn, and maybe sometimes a unexpected benefit that people wouldn't often think of going fare free. And I also appreciate what you said about putting money back into people's pockets, the people who need it the most. When we looked at the demographics of who is riding the bus in Montgomery County, it's people who are going to spend that extra $4 a day on their rent, on their groceries, on clothes and food for their kids. So that's really putting millions of dollars back into the local economy and helping out the people who really, really need it the most. And so before we go to some of the great questions that people have been submitting in the chat, so a reminder, you can directly message me to ask a question. I'll send a question over to Ashanti to ask about what are some of the biggest challenges faced by the people who are riding the bus. The organization, CASA, that you're from, represents a lot of the people, as you were saying, who ride and rely on the bus. And so what are some of the challenges that they're facing, especially right now during the pandemic?
Yeah, the folks that I represent are part of the bucket of people that ride the bus, not because of the environmental impacts that riding the bus provides, or even just the overall the good things that we spoke about, reasons as you should, they ride the bus because they have to, right? If my members, many of them could afford to have a car, could afford to go and pay to have a license at the MBA, they weren't really facing the violence that poverty provides, would not ride the bus, right? They're using the bus because they have to, because it's only means of transportation and it's the only access they have to get to point A to point B. The reality is this pandemic has brought a lot of uncertainty with the bus, with transit in general, about what times in which they can travel, the limits on the bus that they can travel with, the capacities that these transportation modes have, the schedules. You know, how do you have a work schedule that doesn't correlate directly with the bus schedule anymore? How do you move? How do you make those decisions about whether or not I spend money on an Uber, or do I wait 30, 40 minutes for a bus because I'm not fully sure when it's going to come because it's off schedule? I mean, these are a lot of realities that I think sometimes we forget about. But my folks use the bus because they have to, not necessarily because they want to. And this pandemic has only compounded the challenges that they face with trying to operate and navigate this county.
Thank you, Ashanti. Yeah, I think that provides a really vivid look into the lives of the people who are right now still currently riding the bus. I rode the bus very often, multiple times a day before the pandemic, but of course now I'm not going anywhere because I'm lucky enough to be able to work from home. But so many people are not, and those are the people who are really essential to keeping the economy moving. I want to go to some of the great questions that have been put into the chat. So this, I think, might be a question that Clint could maybe address. Mel Tull asks, are new buses being designed with modern COVID-19 ventilation lessons and with HEPA filtration and airflow in from top and out through floor level? Are existing buses being retrofitted? And I guess to broaden that question a little bit is like, what is Ride On doing right now to address the ventilation and hygiene concerns?
Well, good questions again. Right now, from the beginning of the pandemic start, Ride On actually take an initiative step in having a cleaning crew came in and they clean all the buses and sanitize them twice a day, because some of our drivers have split schedule where they goes and come in with a bus. So before the bus ever leave the yard again, it have to be sanitized and the filters them have to be clean, and the whole bus is actually safe in order for it to go back on the road again, because we don't want the chances of anything being left behind to pass on to the next set of people. So the bus has been cleaning, and we're working hand in hand with management in how to better equip the buses in many which way to be on a more preventive side, because it's still something new that we're learning every day about this virus and what steps and what means we can use to help improve the safety and of not only the drivers but the public itself. So they're doing as much as they can with what they know of right now.
Great, thank you, Clint. Our next question was about electric buses from Jeff Weisner. Asking about how will bus system electrification factor into the redesign, reimagining plans. Right now, indoor air quality on traditional diesel buses is poor, poses a health hazard to already marginalized communities who use the bus. How can we electrify frequently used bus lines more rapidly? This might be one, if Shruti, you want to take this, I think Councilmember Evan Glass might also be interested in responding.
Yeah, I think it's a great question for Councilmember Glass to know what kind of funding we can allocate to move, because certainly Sierra Club has brought this into conversation that we need to be moving towards electric fleet in the county and getting more electric vehicles, because the gas emissions are certainly a big challenge, especially for we've talked bus drivers who are in the cars, who are driving for many hours, but just in general for our climate change, to address climate change. So it's a conversation we are having with the transportation departments when we are talking about what we can be doing better, but I would certainly defer to Councilmember Glass on this.
So excellent question. So right now we have 4 4 buses that are electric, and you might have seen the rollout earlier this year. I believe it was this spring, and I believe that we have an order for somewhere around the number of 10, somewhere around there for 10 more. Now the problem, and those are federally funded. The problem about electrifying a fleet, even more than that, is the charging stations. We do not have the existing infrastructure in place to have more buses be electric. And so there are robust conversations taking place right now with PEPCO about upgrading our facilities so that we can accommodate more electric buses online, which is the goal. But right now it's an infrastructure problem.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. And my understanding is that the county is continuing to move towards electrification when possible, but there's not, there's no plan for how to get there necessarily yet. And of course, technological restraints are a big part of that. So that is one of the things that we're calling for in the Montgomery Better Buses platform, is to create an electrification plan for to figure out how are we going to get there over the next 15 years, and how are we going to fund that, where the charging station is going to go, all of those sorts of really big and important questions. So that's something that we think is important, and that would be, I think, an addendum to this, an addendum to the redesign and part of the bigger reimagining of Ride On. So the next question that I will ask is from Cheryl Gross, and the rest of her last name is cut off, Gross Glacier. Is improving pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks, intersections, traffic signals a part of this plan? Right now, access to and from bus stops can be a dangerous proposition in many locations throughout Montgomery County. And I will address your question briefly by saying, yes, it is a part of it. In the other improvements section, we would like to see improved bus stops, improved pedestrian and bicycle connections to bus stops. I know that I've been riding Ride On and then gotten dropped off when I was trying to get to a new location that I was unfamiliar with, and there was no sidewalks connecting me to anywhere, and I was completely stranded on the side of a two-lane road that had no crossings, no sidewalks or anything like that. So I am very empathetic that is very dangerous. And because of that, Montgomery County is very far from meeting its Vision Zero goals of having zero traffic injuries or fatalities. So is there anybody who would want to sort of respond to the greater need to improve pedestrian and bicycle access to bus stops?
Yeah, I can jump in, Jane. From Sierra Club, we have supported the Vision Zero campaign. We've also testified to the planning board as well as to the council in sharing our transportation and land use priorities, where we are talking about smart growth, but making communities walkable and bikeable, investing in the infrastructure to have more sidewalks and the safety of pedestrians. So that's certainly one of Sierra Club priorities, to make sure we are advocating on these issues.
Great, thank you, Shruti. We have a question from B. Ditzler saying that currently Baltimore is the only Maryland jurisdiction that has dedicated bus lanes. What will it take to get dedicated bus lanes in Montgomery County? Clint, maybe that's one that you would be able to talk about.
I think I'll have to defer this question to Councilmember Glass, since he's a part of transportation and environment, because everything is going to fall back on funding. So that will be a question, I think, where Glass will be able to have that conversation with the director of DOT and figure out how that's going to push forward.
Thank you, Clint. And so, as many of you know, we just opened up the BRT for Route 29 Colesville Road from downtown Silver Spring, the Civic, the Transit Center, all the way up to Burtonsville. Then there are the next two lines that we're looking at areas are 355 and then the Veers Mill corridor. And the Veers Mill corridor is actually the most heavily used bus route in all of Maryland. And so again, when we talk about these things and we need to think about transit equity, who's riding a lot of these vehicles, who's taking the buses. But right now, the Department of Transportation is having a conversation about where we can have a dedicated lanes pilot. So those conversations are ongoing. The Route 29, while it doesn't have what probably everybody on this Zoom would consider dedicated lanes, those were conversations from the previous council, previous county executive. And so in the 2 years that I've been here, it might not be what I had wanted. It might not be what, and I suspect it's probably not what a lot of you want either, but we will have more opportunities, and the Department of Transportation is looking at it right now for some flexibility. And so I encourage you to continue talking with us and my colleagues, particularly on the Transportation and Environment Committee, but also write to the Department of Transportation and stay engaged in this campaign, because I know DOT will be engaging with all of us and all of you stakeholders about opportunities that they see ahead. And I'll also just say, because we were talking about question was about pedestrian and bicyclist access just before, at 1:30 this afternoon, so in a little less than 45 minutes, the Transportation and Environment Committee, if you're not zoomed out already, will have a conversation about the Open Streets program and how the Open Streets program has been going during the 9 months of this pandemic. So not directly related to the buses, but it is about outdoors and making sure that our roadways are safe for all of our users. That conversation's at 1:30.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. And on this topic, there was another question about, since money is tight, how about extending express services such as the 101, which goes up and down Rockville Pike, as a step towards the BRT network? And I'll just address that by saying that, yes, that's a big part of our platform for service improvements, is establishing interim express bus service on all of the routes for the future BRT network. So that is definitely something that we would love to see. The next question I will go to is an anonymous question asking that I think probably anybody on the panel is happy to address. We often focus on serving destinations with rapid transit services in order to deliver folks where they want to go. But with a service area as large as Montgomery County, especially considering equity as a priority, how do we better connect with where people live? So I think this question is trying to get at the trade-off that happens with bus planning about coverage versus frequency. If anybody would want to address that, how do we balance those priorities?
I'll hop in there. Everything's about balance, right? And so what we have to do is try to recognize what the budget allows, right? And then, quite frankly, look at that intersectionality between our own ride-on bus routes, and then WMATA, and see what we can do to try and find some balance within the systems that exist here in Montgomery County, and maybe time them so that they're maybe even a little more coordinated. But ultimately, we just had a briefing on Tuesday, and we are in for some budgetary problems, and that is a polite way of saying that we will have some real tough budget discussions and debates in the months moving forward because of the economic situation that we're in. And as I noted to the Chief Administrative Officer, Rich Madaleno, all the decisions I'm going to be making moving forward are how do we keep our most vulnerable residents healthy and safe? And as we've been discussing in these last 55 minutes, we know who takes public transportation. We know who is reliant on public transportation for the well-being of their own families. And so I'll be certainly using that information to make very strong arguments to my colleagues and to the public that we cannot sacrifice our public transportation system, which is an essential service for our essential personnel.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass. And to that discussion about the budget, we have a question from Neil Harris about what is the plan for funding the Better Buses program or our platform. So I can address that by saying that we have in the platform that we would like to see a 15-year investment plan for Ride On in Montgomery County. We were intentional in deciding not to say exactly how that funding should happen. We think that that's a conversation that needs to be had, though, because as we move forward in the future, it's not enough to just maintain the current level of service that we have. We must invest more in our bus system. So there are many different ways that that can happen, and I look forward to having that robust conversation about how we can best do that. So now we're at 12:57, and as I expected, time has flown by. I would like to just ask one final question that hopefully maybe I'll address it towards Ashanti about what it would mean to have free fares in Montgomery County, because I think that that would be one of the really landmark things to come out of this. We have free fares right now during COVID, but to extend those into the future, what would that mean for the people who use Ride-On?
Yeah, it would mean a lot. It would help those individuals not have to stress over budgeting for the bus. It would help those individuals that maybe have a car that they switch over to using the bus post-pandemic when they feel like it's a little bit safer. There's a ton of impacts, especially as we develop around transit, especially as we continue to connect transit with other modes of transportation. Having multimodal stops is really critical, and having a reduction or no fare at all allows people to explore and use the bus freely. For my members and the folks that I serve, it makes the opportunity to go out further possible. And it's something that I think we seriously should consider, because as we move forward and the county is having tough times, the people that we serve do as well. And so taking this off of their plate only helps increase their quality of life and makes things better for them.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. And there was a question in the chat about how much of Ride-On's operations are funded by fare revenue. So to answer that, it's about $18 million from year to year, although of course this year it's much less, but typically in past years, that's how much it's been, which I believe is about 18% of Ride-On's overall budget. So our argument is that that would be $18 million back in the local economy at a time when it's really going to need that sort of stimulus, and when, as Ashanti was saying, the people who use Ride-On are really going to need that money back in their pockets. So thank you all for attending and having this conversation about Ride-On. There are a lot of big questions and a lot of balances and trade-offs and things that we still need to figure out, but I think the emphasis is on that things can be better, and they need to be better in order to get us to these economic development goals, to put our local economy back on track, to reach our transit equity goals that are a long way from being reached, and to meet our environmental goals that are, of course, always important. And we only have so much time left to really make major progress to mitigate and address climate change. So this was a really important conversation, and I really appreciate all of you being here as speakers, and thank you to all the participants for attending. We will be sending out a thank you email that has a link to the Better Buses platform for you to review, and there will also be a link to the recording of this event for you to share or to go back and watch if you missed any part of it. So thank you so much, and I hope that everybody has a great rest of your week and a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, Jane.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy and safe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Everybody
Take
take
care.
All right.
Bye.